aircraft. Submarines. All seeking to deliver scores of nuclear devices within a matter of hours. If the enemy were even partially successful, the blast and thermal damage in key centers of our country would be appalling. But the destruction would not stop there. People untouched by the blast, who had not even seen or heard it, would soon get sick. Why? Radioactive debris from nuclear detonations near the ground can drift with the wind and then sprinkle down on our homes, our factories, and our cities hundreds of miles away. Radioactivity can cause nausea and radiation sickness among the unprotected. Where fallout is heaviest, it can even kill those who have not taken proper shelter. And what about our vital Air Force bases? In an all-out attack, bases that had escaped direct damage might lie right in the path of radioactive fallout. If they had no way of knowing this, or were caught unprepared, many Air Force bases would be knocked out. We might be without their protection for days, vital days. But today, with our knowledge of radioactivity, military installations can continue their wartime missions even in the presence of fallout. With proper precautions, they can keep going in spite of it. But just what makes fallout dangerous in the first place? Let's look closely at a nuclear cloud. If we could see inside it, we would find tons of earth and debris being swept up into the fireball. In this intense heat, solid matter becomes formless and may even vaporize. As the materials swirl inside the fireball, they mix with radioactive fission products of the detonation. When the fireball cools, the surface debris and weapon materials condense into minute particles, trapping some of the radioactive fission products inside them. As the violent updrafts diminish and the cloud stabilizes, the larger, heavier particles fall to earth. Lighter particles, instead of falling straight down, tend to drift with the wind, slowly settling over a large area. Normally, the fallout pattern becomes lighter and less concentrated as the cloud moves away from ground zero. Zones of higher intensities can occur, however, when rain or other weather conditions cause unusually heavy fallout. Ordinarily, only those particles that strike the ground within the first 6 hours or so constitute a major hazard. Of the several kinds of radioactivity resulting from a nuclear detonation, 3 are important in fallout: alpha particles, beta particles, gamma rays. Radioactive debris emitting alpha particles is primarily limited to the immediate vicinity of the nuclear detonation. But beta particle and gamma ray emitters are to be found wherever fallout takes place. The alpha particles travel only a few inches through the air from their emitters and cannot penetrate the skin. They are dangerous only when they get inside the body, through a wound or the mouth or nose. Beta particles, however, travel several feet and can penetrate into the skin and cause severe burns. Ordinary clothing will shield the skin from these beta burns. By far the most serious are the gamma rays. They travel hundreds of feet through the air, and unlike the particles, these rays do penetrate deeply and can cause physical damage. This is not something new, of course, for cosmic rays from outer space are continually bombarding our bodies, and still more radiation may be received from natural mineral deposits. Normally, our bodies can withstand these small doses without evident ill effect. But a large-scale increase in radiation can prove harmful, and everyone who can must take shelter. In a wartime situation, of course, some men have to work out of doors if an installation is to continue to function. Even so, with careful planning and close control of work crews, a commander can hold to a minimum the amount of radiation these men receive. By keeping work shifts to a controlled minimum, an air base can continue to operate at a time when the nation needs it the most. Let's visit a typical Air Force base and see how it met the fallout problem. Echo Air Force Base is the Joint Strategic Air Command, Air Defense Command installation. Its primary mission is to deliver a knockout punch if enemy aircraft threaten our country. In the event of war, the prime consideration would be to get all operational aircraft airborne. Nothing must prevent that. One man had the responsibility for seeing that nothing did prevent it. Major Russell Whitaker, the Base Disaster Control Operations Officer. It was his job to plan and implement a program of operation under emergency conditions, including radioactive fallout. Recent expansions at Echo Air Force Base called for new measures to improve defenses against fallout hazards. The Major's program was based on cooperation from all elements, both SAC and ADC, and involved every unit and person at Echo. The Major had decided that the radiological monitoring teams needed an intensified training program, and the base would have to provide additional shelters to accommodate the new people at Echo. The disaster control plan was solid, well coordinated. It took into consideration the locations of water and power cutoffs, fire hydrants, details of plumbing and wiring in various buildings, the emergency positioning of base motor pool vehicles, everything that could be of importance in an emergency. Consideration had to be given to the possible evacuation of the hospital, under plans carefully worked out with the base surgeon and the provost marshal. A forthcoming base construction project would make it necessary to designate new emergency traffic routes, and recent intelligence reports called for changes in the internal security measures. Major Whitaker also made sure the unit disaster control officers from organizations throughout the base knew how to select a good fallout shelter, big enough to take care of a large number of people, not too much window space to let radiation through. But those walls, how effective would they be against gamma rays? The book says concrete block walls have a moderate absorption effect on gamma. Solid concrete would be better, but such buildings are scarce at Echo. Another important consideration: the building's dimensions from the center to the nearest outside wall and from the ceiling to a point 3 feet above the floor. Gamma rays from fallout around the shelter and from radioactivity on the roof would have to travel through considerable airspace to reach the center of this building. Standard tables for concrete block wall construction and for airspace distances make it possible to determine the shielding effect of a building without taking actual radiation measurements. The residual number indicates the percentage of the outside radioactivity that would reach the inside. No other structure in that part of the base offered as much protection, and this one had the advantage of serving a large work area. Anyone in the shelter who must go out into the fallout to work for a limited time would be near his job. The shelter had adequate plumbing facilities and a central heating plant. All it lacked were supplies, water and food to cover the foreseeable emergency period, first aid kits, emergency communication equipment, exposure control instructions for people in the shelter. With these items and a sign clearly designating the structure as a fallout shelter of a specified capacity and residual number, the building became a part of the Echo Air Force Base Disaster Control Program. Major Whitaker's plans also called for extensive preparation by the installation's engineer. If the base should suffer heavy fallout, earth-moving equipment might be needed for turning under the contaminated soil and for burying radioactive wastes. Heavy equipment like this can be used effectively as emergency vehicles for clearing debris from runways and other areas. Also playing an important part in the base disaster control plan were the vehicles equipped with two-way radios. Communications independent of normal channels could be of utmost importance in a disaster. Another important activity on the base from the disaster control standpoint was the base weather station. If there were a nuclear attack anywhere near Echo, one of the first questions would be, will fallout be blown this way? The first clue would come from weather information. To get that clue, the forecaster uses conventional winds aloft flight data provided by the Weather Bureau and the Air Weather Service. From them, he arrives at a 6-hour forecast of where fallout may take place under the current weather situation. Assuming a nuclear strike here, the winds at various altitudes could deposit fallout in a pattern like this. With the present wind structure, Echo Air Force Base would be in the fringe of the 6-hour fallout pattern. Heaviest concentration of radioactivity would be in the middle portion. The forecaster makes no attempt to predict just how intense the radioactivity might be. Meteorologists make these plots regularly on a routine basis and during an emergency as often as the situation requires. However, final determination must rest upon instrument readings at the proper time. Another outpost for defense against fallout was the radiological monitoring instrument. It kept a 24-hour-a-day check on gamma intensities in the area. Such a unit is fully automatic and requires only routine maintenance. Gamma rays that enter the detector are counted by the device, and the information is fed to a remote indicator that registers the hourly rate of gamma emissions. An intensity reading of 1/2 Roentgen per hour sets off an alarm, alerting the base to the arrival of fallout. The unit can be run by battery, and thus may be independent of other power sources. This was where the commander and his staff were to run the operation in an emergency. Here in the command post, they could keep in touch with the entire situation. All elements on the base concerned with the primary mission had direct communications with the command post. One of the activities that was kept current here was the latest weather forecast on where fallout might occur under the present weather conditions. The command post also had an area map on which radiation intensities could be plotted during a fallout emergency. Certain parts of the base were designated as vital areas to be kept operational at all times. Such an area might have to be hosed off during an actual fallout attack, so work could continue around important equipment. The Major gave close attention to the training of decontamination teams. In an actual emergency, these men, cross-trained for the purpose, would be needed for operations like this to take the place of regular firefighting personnel who would have other defense tasks. All radioactive waste would have to be flushed into proper drainage systems or dumped in some non-vital area where they could cool off. Echo Air Force Base also had an active training program for its radiological recovery teams. Each man was trained in the methods of reclaiming vital areas and in the use of radiation detection instruments. He also wore a personal dosimeter, which would record radiation received. Periodically, each dosimeter would be checked for training purposes. All in all, Major Russell Whitaker, Disaster Control Operations Officer at Echo Air Force Base, knew he had a sound, workable disaster control program. And then military intelligence reported our nation faced the possibility of imminent attack. All persons not essential to the operation of the base were told to take action according to prearranged plans. Families were advised to stay near shelters. The commander and his staff moved into the command post to be ready for instantaneous action. If there were to be war, Echo would be ready. But as yet, there was no definite picture. So the commander directed that for the moment at least, all necessary work would continue. Supervisors of activities throughout the installation were advised by telephone of the situation and instructed to be prepared to take further emergency war plan steps on a moment's notice. Under the base pyramid alert system, off-duty flight and ground support crews began to arrive. Over at the base disaster control point, radiation monitoring teams were getting their equipment. Each team would be responsible for one part of the base if a fallout emergency arose. Augmentation crews were arriving at Air Police Headquarters too, to defend the base against possible sabotage. Echo Air Force Base was playing for keeps.
Attention, attention please. Unless you have been instructed otherwise by your supervisor, proceed immediately to your designated shelter. Repeat, unless you have been instructed otherwise, proceed immediately to your designated shelter.
Echo Air Force Base is at war.
Attention, attention please. Unless you have been instructed otherwise by your supervisor, proceed immediately to your designated shelter. Repeat, unless you have been instructed otherwise, proceed immediately to your designated shelter.
Enemy aircraft are in our area. Base utilities have to be shut off for the duration of the threat to the base. Meanwhile, miles away, word of nuclear attacks pour into the Echo command post. Will fallout from any of the explosions be blown this way? Unless conditions change, Echo Air Force Base will be right in the path. Our intelligence information indicates the nuclear yield of the weapon was quite high. The problem, to continue full operations until the fallout commences here, and then to do everything possible to carry on the mission right through the fallout. Some men will have to remain outside even after the fallout starts. It's the commander's responsibility to fix the maximum permissible dose his men may be allowed to take in the light of the necessities of his mission. The base has a little time before the fallout can be expected here. All activities that can do so must move inside under cover. After fallout arrives, those men whose work will keep them out of doors must be put on a tight schedule to hold their exposure to a minimum. You can't feel it, you can't smell it, you may not be able to see it, but it's there, coming at you. There's no time to lose. The turnaround time must be kept to a minimum. That pilot must get into a shelter immediately. Only those who absolutely have to stay outside can be permitted to remain in the fallout. Over on the bomber flight line, problems of a special sort confront these men. This B-47, one of the generation aircraft not in hot alert status, has just been fueled with a full combat load. But more work still has to be done before this aircraft can take off on its strike mission. Dozens of electronic black boxes have to be checked out, and those that are bad must be replaced. These are tasks that require patience. They can't be hurried. Every operating unit on the aircraft must have electric power. Whenever there is need for extra parts or the services of a specialist, radio dispatch trucks provide the fastest means of getting the work done. The maintenance shop on wheels not only expedites the overall program, but it also gives the men some protection from the fallout. From time to time, radiological survey teams make radiation level readings as a check on the central monitoring equipment. Back in the maintenance control section, the unit disaster control officer is in close touch with the situation. Each work crew's exposure time in the fallout field is predicted on the specialist planning chart. Any report of change in radiation intensities has a direct bearing on how long a crew can be permitted to remain outside. These radiation level readings may come from both the command post and from special radiological survey teams. As the crews in the fallout area approach their exposure limit, new crews must be dispatched to relieve them. In this way, a base can be assured of continued operation in spite of the fallout, without unduly risking excessive exposure among vital personnel. A nearby radar station has experienced fallout too. One of the vital links in our national defense, this station must be kept operational. Flushing away radioactive dust from the roof removes one of the threats to the men working inside and permits the radar station to continue operations. Inside, during the emergency, work goes on around the clock. Some men seated at positions near the outside walls may require special protection. because the walls alone may not be adequate shielding against a heavy fallout. Each 7 1/2 inches of sand cuts gamma radioactivity by 1/2. Back at Echo, as the hours wear on, the Disaster Control Operations Officer keeps a careful check on the radiation levels. Each time he gets a reading, he advises the forecaster, who passes the information on to other weather facilities. In turn, intensity readings from elsewhere are plotted as they are received. This information gives a good indication how the fallout cloud is moving. Latest plots of the Echo readings show intensities are on a steady decline. If all goes well, and no other fallout clouds complicate the picture, the crisis may be passed. Once the pattern reveals a plunge in intensities, a pretty fair prediction can be made that they will fall for a while and then level off in a long, slow decay of the radioactive emitters. When a level is reached at which it would be safe to make a base-wide survey, helicopters can take preliminary radiation intensity readings. Helicopters are of particular value in surveying remote sectors that otherwise could be approached only through heavily contaminated areas. Intensity reports thus obtained are relayed by radio to the command post, where a detailed picture of the entire area is constructed. Where it is safe to do so, fast-moving ground monitoring teams get more detailed information. Meanwhile, decontamination crews help return the base to full operation by rendering safe those areas where work must be resumed at the earliest possible moment. Since this is a slow process at best, some areas that may be hot for a while but are not needed right away are simply marked off limits. While this work is going on, in each fallout shelter, the senior officer present watches over his people. He makes regular reports over the Special Disaster Control Communications Network as to the welfare of the personnel in the shelter. Anyone who has been in high-intensity areas or whose clothing carries radioactive dust must be processed through the Personnel Decontamination Center. Prompt attention to those who are thought to have radioactive matter on their bodies will prevent them from getting painful beta contact burns. Simplest and best way to get rid of the dust: take a thorough shower. The hair should come in for special attention because it's an excellent dust collector. The feet can carry contamination too from dust kicked up in the fallout area. Anyone who hasn't done a good job gets sent back to the showers. After that, each man is provided clean clothes. His body may have sustained a mild dose of radioactivity in line of duty, but bodily recovery is rapid, and in most cases, he will not even notice any ill effects. Echo Air Force Base survived and did its job because its people were prepared. What we have seen here has never actually happened in our country, at least not yet. And it is our fervent hope that it never will. But it could happen. We must be prepared. And if we are prepared, if our bases are ready, if our people know what to do, we will keep going, keep fighting, even in radioactive fallout.